April 8, 217 AD. On a dusty road in Mesopotamia, an emperor halts to relieve himself in the middle of a military march. Around him, the imperial guard stands watch, but among them lurks a traitor. In a moment of distraction, the centurion Julius Martialis lunges forward and pierces him with his sword. The man who falls is no ordinary victim, it is Caracalla, son of the Severan dynasty, one of the most feared rulers of Rome. That single, sharp and silent blow not only brings down an emperor but also opens a power vacuum that will change the destiny of the empire. In just a few days, an unlikely man, a discreet bureaucrat, a jurist who had never worn the purple, will rise as Caesar, Macrinus. But his glory will be short-lived. In only 14 months, Rome will see him rise, stagger, and fall with the same speed with which he was elevated. His story is that of an official who dreamed of ruling, and ended up devoured by the very imperial machine he had tried to control. And most disturbing of all, among the accounts circulating at the time, a dark legend emerged, an alleged massacre in the newly inaugurated Baths of Caracalla. An episode so brutal that it still divides historians today, reality, or propaganda meant to tarnish the emperor. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes we are going to separate myth from truth, and uncover why the reign of Macrinus is one of the briefest and most enigmatic in Roman history. In the heart of Rome, just a year before Caracalla's death, a work had been inaugurated that dazzled the ancient world, the Baths of Caracalla. With a capacity for more than 1,600 bathers at once, they were far more than a place to wash, they were a temple of leisure, politics, and imperial prestige. Their marble walls, brought from Numidia, gleamed in the sun, mosaics depicted mythological scenes with almost hypnotic precision, and the hydraulic system was so advanced that it still astonishes engineers today. Beneath the floors ran the hypocaust, a network of tunnels where fire heated the water and kept the steam rooms warm. Here, citizens did more than bathe, they sealed commercial alliances, negotiated marriages, and discussed senatorial intrigues. It was a microcosm of Roman life, a stage where luxury and power intertwined among granite columns and vaulted ceilings. It is no coincidence that, after Caracalla's death, this place became the epicenter of rumors and legends. The grandeur of the baths was so monumental that any story, even the most macabre, found an echo in its walls. April 8, 217. On a route near Carrhae, in Mesopotamia, Caracalla marched at the head of his army. He was only 29 years old, yet already feared throughout the empire for his violent character and brutal decisions. He had executed his own brother Geta in their mother's presence and had earned a reputation for ruling with iron and blood. That day, in the midst of the campaign against the Parthians, he asked to stop the march to relieve himself by the roadside. His guards surrounded him, but among them was a man with a grudge, the centurion Julius Martialis. In a moment of distraction, he drew his sword and plunged it into the emperor's body. Caracalla collapsed to the ground without a chance to react, struck down by a betrayal as sudden as it was final. Ancient sources such as Cassius Dio and Herodian agree that behind the blow stood a clear beneficiary, Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect. A jurist of Mauritanian origin, discreet and calculating, he had risen through the ranks thanks to his administrative skill. But Caracalla looked upon him with suspicion, and Macrinus knew that sooner or later he might fall victim to the same paranoia that had consumed so many before him. The assassination was not an isolated act of rage, it was the masterstroke of an official who understood that, in Rome, survival sometimes meant striking before the sword struck you. With Caracalla's death, the throne was left vacant at a critical moment, and Macrinus was ready to seize it. When news of Caracalla's death spread through the Roman camp, shock was immediate. The soldiers, leaderless and uncertain, turned their eyes toward the only man with enough authority to take command, Marcus Opellius Macrinus, Praetorian prefect. His profile contrasted sharply with previous emperors. He came neither from a senatorial family nor an aristocratic lineage. Born in Mauritania, he had trained as a jurist and risen through his skill in law and administration. He was, in essence, a disciplined bureaucrat, not a charismatic general nor a hereditary prince. And yet, within days, he was proclaimed emperor by the legions. To strengthen his position, he granted his son Domitian, only 10 years old, the title of Caesar. Rome now had a new ruler, the first in its history who had never been a senator. But with power also came fragility. The same soldiers who had acclaimed him were those who had once idolized Caracalla. Now they eyed with suspicion a man who shared neither imperial blood nor military prestige. Macrinus knew it: if he wished to survive, he had to prove he could rule firmly and keep the army, his only real base of power, content. The new emperor inherited an immediate crisis: the war with the Parthians. Caracalla had launched the campaign with the same brutality that marked his life, leaving behind a trail of destruction and resentment. Now, with his assassination, the Roman legions were exposed deep in enemy territory, vulnerable and without a clear plan. Macrinus realized that continuing the war was suicide. Rome was exhausted, and the imperial treasury depleted. So he chose to negotiate a hasty peace. The price, however, was enormous, surrendering disputed territories and paying the Parthians a massive indemnity in gold. The agreement bought time, but at a staggering political cost. To the Senate, it was a sign of prudence; to the soldiers, an insult. The legionaries, accustomed to receiving plunder after campaigns, saw the peace as humiliation, and Macrinus as a weak leader. Resentment grew when the emperor tried to curb military expenses by reducing benefits and delaying payments. The loyalty he had gained on the fields of Mesopotamia began to fracture. Rumors spread from tent to tent: Caracalla gave us victories, Macrinus gives us bills. The man who had seized power with a precise strike now began to feel the invisible dagger of military distrust pressing against his back. While Macrinus's image wavered in Rome, in Syria a woman was silently weaving a net strong enough to bring him down: Julia Misa, sister of Julia Domna and aunt of the murdered Caracalla. Intelligent, wealthy, and deeply influential in the East, she refused to accept that a Mauritanian bureaucrat should sit on the throne she believed belonged to her family. Misa played her boldest card. She convinced the soldiers in Syria that her teenage grandson, Varius Avitus Bassianus, was not just a boy, but the illegitimate son of Caracalla. That youth, only 14, would go down in history as Elagabalus. The promise was irresistible: with him, the legions would not only restore Severan blood but also reclaim the chance for spoils and glory as in Caracalla's days. The strategy worked. Syria's cohorts began deserting en masse to Misa's cause. Within months, rebellion had turned into an army. On its standard, more than the face of a teenager, waved the memory of a slain emperor, and the soldiers' resentment toward Macrinus. For the first time since his proclamation, the usurper felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Civil war was about to erupt, and across the board, Julia Misa was moving her pieces with the patience of a consummate strategist. June 8, 218. On the outskirts of Antioch, the forces of Macrinus and the legions loyal to Elagabalus stood face to face. The emperor knew everything depended on a single day: if he won, he would crush the rebellion; if he fell, his name would be buried among the forgotten usurpers. Sources tell us that Macrinus, insecure as a general, tried to maintain a defensive strategy. But on the other side stood Gannys, the young commander of the rebel army, supported by Julia Misa's cunning. His troops' morale was overwhelming; they fought convinced they were defending Caracalla's bloodline. The clash was brutal. Dust, spears, and cries shook the battlefield. At first, Macrinus's men held firm, but their leader's indecision doomed them. When the enemy cavalry charged with full force, the imperial lines began to collapse. Macrinus tried to flee the disaster. Disguised, he abandoned the field, leaving his soldiers to face defeat. The emperor who had risen to power through cunning lacked the courage to die with his army. That day, the empire's destiny changed forever. Macrinus was defeated, and his reign, barely 14 months long, was doomed. Macrinus tried to escape disguised as a common traveler but was soon captured in Cappadocia. His end was swift: beheaded, his head sent to Rome as a trophy, a brutal contrast to the violence he himself had orchestrated against Caracalla. His son, Domitian, met the same fate. At only 11 years old, he was executed, a reminder to the world that in Rome, the imperial crown spared no one, not even the innocent. The Baths of Caracalla, inaugurated just a year before the assassination, remained standing as a symbol of Severan grandeur. Within their marble walls and mosaics, legends still echo, some true, others born of fear. For the story of Macrinus reminds us that in the empire, the real battle was not always fought with swords, but with rumors, propaganda, and broken loyalties. His reign, fleeting and nearly forgotten, was marked by a single lesson: in Rome, bureaucracy without charisma was weaker than steel, and power without roots was nothing but a mirage. And now, the question is for you. Do you think Macrinus was a prudent man betrayed by circumstance, or merely a bureaucrat incapable of bearing the imperial purple? Leave me your opinion in the comments, share this video if you were surprised by this episode, and subscribe to continue exploring the darkest and most fascinating secrets of Imperial Rome.